We are going to start speaking, starting at the far end with Mr. Tapiwa Chatikobo, I hope I'm saying that right, who is going to speak on, let me say this right, land reform and livestock production in South. Tapiwa is at the PLUS, which is a long word.
PLUS is an acronym which stands for Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies. It's an institute in South Africa based at the University of the Western Cape, South Africa. Thank you.
And he's going to be followed in the middle by Mbongeni, who is at the KUL University of Leuven in Brussels. And he's going to talk about land, remittances and rural farmers. And the last one next to me will be Dr. Nick Jones, who's at the Open University, and his talk is Fly the Frontier to Cotton Country. I'm sure it's going to be interesting, so without wasting too much time, maybe Tapiwa can have his first talk, and then he'll be followed by Mbongeni.
As my chair introduced me, I'm Tapiwa Chatikobo. So today I'll be speaking on class dynamics in livestock production after post-land reform in Matabeleland South. So this is part of my PhD project that is actually ongoing, and I'm actually in my second year of my PhD studies. And so what I'm going to present here is actually sort of some insights that are actually beginning to emerge from my field work. So I don't have a lot of states and stuff like that, so you can relax. So I won't talk much about the land reform context, but a lot has been said by patients. But so just to set the context, a lot of studies on land reform, particularly in Zimbabwe, have been focused mainly on Mashonaland province, looking at crop production, and a few of them actually looked at Matabeleland, which is actually a drier part of Zimbabwe, where political, social, and social dimensions are also very, very different. So, of course, there are some few studies that have been done in Matabeleland. For example, Jocelyn Alexander has done a good job in Caesar district, and also Clifford Mabena have also studied something in Matabeleland South. But however, I feel that a lot of these studies, among these few studies in Matabeleland, have been mainly focused on the politics side and general livelihoods. So I feel like there is actually a missing, there's an agrarian political economy view which is actually missing in there. So I am actually coming in with an agrarian political economy view. So this is just a map that I actually took from one of Ian's blogs, and it shows different sites where land reform research has been done. So if you look at the southwestern part of Zimbabwe, you will realize that there's few studies that are actually looking at the consequences of land reform after in Matabeleland. So there's actually a thematic and a spatial gap in land reform literature in Zimbabwe at the moment. So my study is actually trying to address some of these key issues. So I will give you a basic, sort of stylized facts about Matabeleland. Matabeleland lies in the agroecological regions 4 and 5, which means that it actually receives less than 650 annual rainfall per annum. So it's actually for productive, for livestock production. It's actually suited for livestock production. And apart from that, this region has been also subjected to post-independence conflicts, which saw a lot of people dying, civilians dying as a result of what they call Bukura. Apart from that, the region has got a history of supporting opposition party. So these factors make Matabeleland very, very interesting for my study. So looking into literature, a lot of studies that have been done in Zimbabwe as a whole. For example, schools. He has been one of the key scholars. He and his co-workers argued that there are actually new processes or new patterns of social differentiation that are actually emerging in these new sites. In their study in Masvingo district, for example, they found out that 40% of beneficiaries were actually accumulating from below, while others were actually finding it hard to survive. So there's actually an issue of class differentiation, and some are winning, some are losing. So recently they've also written a paper around Mburu about tobacco boom, and they've also argued that 60% of the beneficiaries in Mburu are actually accumulating from below, which means that they are actually producing surplus and selling, and also reinvesting that in agriculture. So my paper actually tries to contribute to this current debate on the dynamics of agrarian change post first regulatory reform in Matabeleland, where livestock predominate. So our study this paper actually tries to offer a story about how livestock systems in different ways can drive processes of social differentiation and class formation, as well as accumulation in these dry parts of the country. So small-scale livestock production, actually what I'm finding out, or this is actually my hypothesis, small-scale livestock production is actually dominating in these A1 farms, which were actually carved out in the land reform. Although in A1, there is actually also some crop farming going on, which I think a lot of scholars actually tend to ignore as well, but which nevertheless, I believe that is actually contributing to self-provisioning as well in that region. Whilst in the A2, which are actually the large-scale farms, there's a sort of accumulation of large herds by these farmers, particularly in the self-contained plots where these are actually small farms. So a lot of people actually are beginning to accumulate large herds of animals, but through political connections as well as off-farm businesses. So it's actually a combination of the two. It's not like there is one way in which we can pinpoint. So in terms of my conceptual framework, I'm actually being trained in political economy. So I'm actually centered on, my analysis is actually centered on class relations. So I'm actually using a class perspective as my analytical framework. So, which hinges upon the petty commodity production, which is actually, which can be defined as small enterprise producing using family labor as well as in order to reproduce themselves. So these petty commodity producers actually combine or actually occupy two class positions, that is capital and labor. So in our case study, they are actually farmers who are actually occupying a class capital position, i.e. because they own a means of production, that is land. And also they exploit themselves as farm workers because they use family labor, so they're actually PCP or petty commodity producers. So these tend to differentiate, or they're actually subject to differentiation. And some begin to produce a regular surplus or reinvest in production and expand, thereby leading to expanded reproduction or accumulation. Others begin to sell their labor power in order to make a subsistence. So my case studies are actually based in Matobo district, which is there, as you can see, and I'm mainly concentrated on 1-1, which is actually at the 123. Why I concentrated on that one? Because there is actually a high concentration of different land use types, which actually allows me to compare different livestock systems that are actually emerging from these land reforms. For example, there was actually a special model. A lot of you are actually familiar with other resettlement models, A1s, A2s, but actually there's actually another model which is called a 3-tier model, which was actually designed for extended grazing for the communal farmers people. So the Matabeleland people say they don't want resettlement into the farm, but they want access to more grazing, so they were actually given this three-tier model, three-tier farm. So that's actually very key to note. However, they've been subdivided, and some of them have been turned into what they call self-contained farms. And these farms were actually created just before the Jambanja. So the self-contained are actually not Jambanja as such. And they are also managed by council, not by government, those ones. So my research, my ongoing project is, like I said, focused on WAD 23, and I'm using SciA's extensive and intensive research design, which means I'm using both qualitative and quantitative methods in order to get what I want. So for this paper, I'm actually interested in two key questions, which are actually part of my PhD project, but however, I've got many questions. So what kinds of new livestock farming systems are emerging in these former white commercial ranches, which are now occupied by A1s, self-contained, and A2 farmers? And to what extent are these generating new processes of social differentiation, class formation, and agrarian accumulation, and by what mechanism? So these are the very two questions that I will try to answer using some of the insights from the in-depth interviews that I've collected so far. So in new sort of A1 schemes, I realized that they're actually involved in mixed farming, which involves crop production and livestock production. But what I want to say here is, I was actually sort of puzzled by the way these farmers are actually doing well when there's good rains. So this is this season, this 2017 season, and a lot of them, they're actually expecting a good yield. Some actually claiming that they will get up to 7 tons because it has been a good year. And also livestock actually also plays an important role, and a lot of them are also involved in small livestock enterprises. So I will just give you some case studies. So this is Mr. CM, and he was allocated an A1 plot, and before he got here, he had nothing. And now Mr. CM is owning a car which he used by selling his animals, which he bought by selling his animals and reinvesting the proceeds in the car. He also has got solar and other equipment as well. So he has been accumulating through crop and cattle production as well. When he, in 2013-14 season, he had a good harvest, which he managed to actually sell about 4 tons of maize, which is actually, I could not believe. So, however, this does not mean that it's a good story of success there. There are actually people that are struggling, which I call strugglers. And there is Mr. LL. He is actually unable to reproduce himself through farming, so he has got to sell his labor to other farmers in order to make a living. And he relies more on his mom's donkeys for transport purposes. And this is what Ian described as hanging in his category. However, in self-contained plots, which are actually small farms and A2 farms, they are more concentrated on livestock production with very minimum crop production, if there is any. Only the crop production that are doing, they are actually for supporting their headers, which is actually for their labor consumption. So I will, on this next slide, I will concentrate more on the A2s and self-contained, because I have been trying to sort of work towards a typology of these cattle farmers. So what I got here, this is actually for A2s and self-contained. So what I got here is actually the accumulators who are actually sort of regularly selling cattle, reinvesting in agriculture and other off-farm activities, including houses, and also hiring a lot of labor, and also acquiring additional grazing through various means. And there's also aspiring accumulators. So I'm based in South Africa. One thing that I've realized is that a lot of Zimbabwean immigrants who are particularly in the village, they're actually investing in livestock in case of mishaps. So a lot of these people are actually buying livestock in their rural homes and building large herds in the belief that when one day they'll go back home, And some are actually sort of operating these from different parts of South Africa. They actually visit their farms every fortnight. It was actually interesting for me. So these people are, so my aspiring accumulators are actually those who are actually employed permanently somewhere else, but investing in animals in order that they go back again. So these, I call them aspiring accumulators, because they have not started selling as yet, but they're actually building on the head. Then, interestingly, they're actually an emerging class of what I call landlords. These are the very people who got access to land through political connections, but nevertheless, they lack capital to invest or to engage in production. So these people are actually sort of renting out most of their land. And however, they've got few animals on their farm. Then they've also petty commodity producers. These ones are actually those who are actually able to reproduce themselves through cattle farming with additional income from remittances, from relatives who are actually outside South Africa, outside Zimbabwe. And then we've got stragglers. So for my A1, A2, the self-contained, because the self-contained is administered by council, there's actually a land tax as well as the A2. They have to pay land tax. Some of these people, the stragglers, are actually failing to pay the land tax. So they have to rent out in order to survive. Or otherwise, if it is in the case of the council will repossess the plot. So they actually hanging in, they were struggling. So this is just a profile of about 10 farmers. One thing that I want to emphasize here is I think there's actually a symbiotic relationship between farming and other off-farm activities, which includes permanent jobs. So there is actually, I cannot tell what is, because a lot of these people, it seems to me, they are using money from elsewhere to buy animals, or then take money from livestock and invest in houses or something else. So there's actually a symbiotic relationship. You cannot separate the two. So I will just give you another case study. This is actually one of my accumulators who is actually a self-contained plot farmer. And he was actually allocated 168 hectares. And this is actually a very dry area. So according to the carrying capacity, he's actually overstocking. He's actually having 200 cattle on the farm. And he's only allowed less than 20 cows on there if you are actually calculating. So what does this person do in order to survive? He's actually leasing in more land from the landlords, or actually borrowing. Or sometimes, some are actually involved in what I call proxy or disguised ownership, whereby they register their farms in other people's names, which are not there. Because the law of Zimbabwe does not allow you to have multiple farms. So these are actually some of the strategies. So he reinvested some of his proceeds in agriculture. And recently he actually bought a lot of, tractors, disc plow, and other water engines. So there's actually investment going in there. I'm not sure about this thing of lack of uncertainty in property and the relationship between investment and I think a lot of farmers are actually investing despite the risk of being losing out when the farms are being repossessed. So this is actually one of the landlords. This person is actually an MP, and she got land through political connections, 800 hectares, and owns 2 cattle when I visited there, and 10 goats, and she's renting the plot to other local farmers as well. So, and receives the rentals in kind, which she then converts into cash. So some are actually getting cattle or heifers in order to rebuild their herd, but some they just sell. It's actually for survival. So my tentative conclusion are that these cases offer some evidence of process of reproduction, accumulation, and differentiation, as is often the case in Mashonaland. But this is mainly through cattle production as the key driver of social differentiation and transformation. But however, this thing of differentiating between accumulation from below and above, where people use, in terms of accumulation from above, where people use patronage, it's actually very difficult or it's actually problematic. It's very difficult for me to make a distinction, because one thing that I realized that sometimes farmers got big, large land through political connection, but then they failed to accumulate, which I call it's actually fail. I've termed it somewhere else. So these people actually failing to accumulate, but then there are other people who actually got land through political connection, but nevertheless they're actually doing very well and actually accumulating through accumulation from above. So it's as Mam Dan said for Uganda, it's very, very difficult for us to make a clear distinction of the two. We cannot separate the two. So there's no Chinese boundary between these two parts or these two dynamics. However, those that are accumulating in my step slide, I realize that they are limited. Okay, so those who gained land, large tracts of land through patronage, they've got limited capital in order to engage in production and can be seen, in my view, as failed attempts to accumulate from above, which is through patronage. And those that are actually accumulating through cattle production in the self-contained and A2 farm are constrained by the size of the land which they were given through land reform. However, it is interesting to note that an informal land market, or what Chimo and Woodhouse call vernacular land market, is actually emerging in these land reform sites, where people are starting to rent out or rent in land, but nevertheless they are not. But these arrangements are not supported by any legal document. It's not allowed to rent out land which you got from the land reform. So the people actually, they've got different acquisition methods which they use in order to access more grazing, which includes leasing in, disguised or proxy ownership, borrowing from other friends who are actually not having animals or cattle on the farm, but in return they pay land tax for them. Or others are actually trying to split their heads and graze them in different parts of in different locations in order to cope with land shortage. Thank you, but I think I still have time. Let me leave it.
Thank you. I'm going to try to follow on that. In fact, conveniently, our sites are located in the same area. So there's a lot of background data that I don't have to get into now. So thanks for that. My title today is Land Remittances, Rural Farming and the Free Market. You'll see I've highlighted 2 of those 4 bits there because I would like to get a little bit more on those. The presentation that I've got here is a little bit longish, so I'm going to go really fast through the first bit so I can start talking about the rural farming aspect of it. And I would also like to apologize in advance. There's 1 or 2 graphic pictures, so those who are sensitive, I will try to flash through them a little bit quickly. Okay, so my methodology also in my topo was very similar to Patience. I had to do an ethnographic study of some of the farmers in that location. But I'll try to contextualize it a little bit and then give you a bit of a framework to understand. I would like to introduce my mother from my side. I worked with her for about 4 months or so, and we were raising broiler chickens for wholesale. Over there we have 2,300 chicks, which are supposed to stay for about 42 days, 6 weeks or so. One morning when we were busy preparing this, preparing to feed the chickens in the morning, she said to me, I woke up too late, and how can a man wake up in the middle of the day? And how can you sleep and forget that you have children and that sort of thing? And at this point I looked up and the stars were still out, so I wasn't quite sure what she meant by the middle of the day. But later I found out she was busy tending the bedding there, and then she says to me, this I'll never forget, she says, don't you see, Ngulube, that these little things are the police? That caught my attention, and for a while I was trying to figure out what she meant. So if these are the police, in what way are they the police, and on whose authority, what do they do, and that sort of thing. So I took that line and I tried to unpack it. So I'm going to give you a very quick background. Most of this stuff has already been discussed. So in terms of the land structure in Zimbabwe, we all know this. The 1934 Land Act, what I've called the color of territory, changed the territory of the country to black and white. So it was big commercial farms for the whites, subsistence farmers. There was a few other variations, but not that much. It's really pretty black and white. And Tanya Lee calls this basic capitalist relations. It's very, very clear. But there was resistance to this. So it's not a one-way story, okay? So most of the white farmers under that regime had access to capital and support and what have you and so on, a lot of money every month, every year and so forth, subsidies and so on. There's a lot of data on this. But not all of them were like this. So I say not all white farmers were created equal. Some are less equal than others. Some actually resisted this. So some white farmers, in fact, when they purchased land, they didn't go through the colonial state. They went and negotiated with the communities, in fact. And they became the daughters or sons of those communities. So that was quite different. And they also had interracial marriages, which was a big no-no. At the time, there was one fellow whom I know of in that area. He has achieved saintlyhood, the way people talk about him, because he married a really good stock woman from the area and so on. And also, one of the other farmers used to buffer this Bantu education and try to give people more education than they would. It was illegal, in fact, what was doing. So there was a lot of these kind of things. So it's not a very clear history. It's not a widespread black good. It's not like that at all. Black resistance mostly was around the labor question, trying to get more for your labor than you are putting in. So very much a Marxist sort of thing, the struggle over time. But the big one is the political organization and the land struggle leading to the Lancaster House Agreement. Now, this whole period we know about. This one, there was a conjuncture. A lot has been discussed about the land reform. One thing I wanted to add there is that at this point, the cause of the land reform was pretty much everything that had happened before. But what happened is this spark came out of somewhere a little bit unexpected. The reason I said I want to quickly qualify this, I called it corruption there, just to put it as corruption, in inverted commas, because I don't like that word. Same way we'll talk about it as democratization from below, in fact, if you look at it. But I will explain what I mean. Very quickly, some dates here. So at this point of the land reform when it started, there was this whole history, the geopolitics between the UK, Zimbabwe, and international finance, independence promises, political opposition, all of these things were happening at the same time. Then in August, there was this whole corruption scandal, about 1.5 billion that has disappeared. What caught my attention here was that they were saying the land is ours and they're defending this white person to stay in the farm. So I wanted to understand what do they mean by that. And here I've just said it was really not a matter of legal title, but rather practical benefits. So there's this relationship which developed between communities and the former white farmers because of the change of the landscape. The color of the land is now black, but there is no money. So, right. The case I'm going to look at, I will run through this supersonic speed, is a white farmer who has been working with a local community to try to get into the global market, or the national market at least, in poultry. The program that you offer is it gives some loans, training, inputs, market support. This is basic contract farming. So these are all the points you know. What I then did is I moved in and I stayed with them. What they do is they sit, this is the area where we are. There's an agribusiness training school there and the communities around them. So they give them training, they give them inputs, and they collect the products after. So this is part of the training, and that's yours truly with a shovel. So on arrival, I made a deal with the lady that you saw in the beginning, that I will stay with her, help her with the chicken business, build the house. You see the chicken house on the far right, which was kind of dilapidated. In return, I get to stay there and get some food from her, and we work together, and I get to understand all this. So these are some of the processes that the contract will not have. Basically, in the contract, it's I supply this, you do the labor, I pick it up, you get it, we share the profits. But in terms of the actual lived experience, the ethnographic part of it is actually very, very invisible. For example, the building that was done, I had to do a lot of building. That's me cutting logs and grass and water views and so on. And I'm now a certified chicken farmer. If I don't get my PhD, that's it. But all of these things are actually really invisible in the contract. This lady here is the same old woman. She's 80 years old. She's sitting on top of the roof trying to repair because of the rains. Okay. The second bit is the brooding period. So the chickens arrive and we have to brood, and the first 2 weeks are the most crucial ones, because at that point most of these chicks don't really have feathers. They are very, very vulnerable, and you've got to work really, really hard to make sure they don't suffocate each other, they stay alive and so forth. You need to give them attention. But to do that successfully, there's a lot of background work. Again, chopping these hardwoods, it takes forever. I asked myself in the back, I don't know how that happened, but this was a chaotic experience. And then you would make a fire in there to keep the place warm so that they don't crowd too much and suffocate each other. But of course, there's a lot of danger with fires in a thatch plastic type structure. So there's been quite a few accidents. Some of them are linked to just accidents, but others are also linked to production competitions. So in the beginning, a few people started with the chicken farming. Others then started to join, and then that pushes the price down because the market is small. Right? So what do? You either produce the other guy or industrial espionage with the match. But then they changed the strategy. The farmer had to change the strategy to say, actually, if you compete with markets outside the village, so don't think of producing 50 or 100 chickens to sell to your neighbor. Think of producing 1,000 each at least. And then now you've got economies of scale that you can leverage and sell to Bulawayo or Harare or wherever. Okay. Monitoring and assistance, what it actually meant was there is this thing called the house card. On that little piece of paper in the center, you've got a few categories. It will tell you the date, how many days the chickens are, how many chickens are in there, how many have died, how much feed have you given today, how much water, how much medicine, and so forth. So it's a new kind of work ethic, a new work regime. It's like a piece of discipline. But the thing that keeps you disciplined is not the people, it's the police, which is these little chickens, because when they die, it's your money going down the drain. Okay, so when she says these things that the police is starting to become a little bit clear. They also have guys who come to assist. This is the fellow on the far right, who will come and check every other day if things are going well, if you need medicine, logistics, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of support and guidance. Monitoring maintenance, every day you've got to look at these chickens and make sure they're fine. That's me checking the feet at the bottom, because that's a very sensitive part of the chicken. If the chicken starts to bleed at the bottom, it gets infected very easily, they get sick easily, and that's your loss. So that's a sign of bedding which is not soft enough. So you've got to go out into the bush and find more grass and leaves and whatever it is. You cannot sleep. And you'll see that in the middle picture there's a bed, right there. That's where we slept, because they eat 24 hours a day pretty much. Well, 23, because they will sleep in the afternoon when it's really hot. But it's a 24-hour business, which means the kind of labor you need involves everybody. That's a 4-month-old baby whom I was taking care of, if you can believe that. She's still alive, so. And the bottom picture, that's her and the mom, and this is the new daughter-in-law on the top right. Everybody is involved. So the kind of labor, I wish I had more time to get into the various forms of labor that are leveraged for this, but I don't have the time. So just very quickly, after a while, this was maybe week 3, she says, I am sick of eating chicken. And they've been doing this for over 12 years at this point, okay? Now, when she talks about eating chicken, I didn't realize what she meant until one day I was served the chicken, which was a little bit discolored. And then I realized, no, this is not actual chicken. This is what they call mortality. Because this is the name on the house card. How many chickens died today? That's mortality. So this is what they call mortality, right? So very quickly, I'll flash through this. That's living on mortality. Basically, what that meant is, when the chicken dies after, say, 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it's already taken so much from you, you can't afford to throw it away. When they are younger, you can. You don't lose that much. But also, I have to say that I came at this place in a very, very special time. It was, let's say, conjuncture again, where there's been a drought for 3 years. There is absolutely no water. The rivers are completely dry. We had to dig the riverbed to find water. It was a very, very special time. Now, the chicken profits as well had been declining over the past, say, 4 or 5 years, at which point, this is when we took the chickens in, and the profit was about $30 on that particular account. So my question was, why do you continue doing this? What's the deal? And what I've uncovered was quite interesting, but I ran out of time here. one of the things was they aspire to get into the program so they can go to private markets. There's various people who have dug boreholes for themselves, bought a grinding mill so they can produce part of their own feed and so on. And they call that chicken in because you can get to sell to chicken in or to whoever else. Then you become an independent practitioner. There's a few who made it, and a lot of people aspire to that. So this is about whether you chicken in or chicken out. I like the term. So basically, this lady, she was telling me, you know, sometimes I think I can't stop, but I can't continue. I can't come out and I can't go on, but she stays in the thing. So I'm trying to understand why. Why would you do that? I spoke to her husband, and she was saying, well, you know, let's Zoom. I don't know how to translate that very well. It's she's bored. It's not boredom, but it's a more melancholy kind of death. So she calls it the empty nest syndrome, because you spend 24 hours a day with these things. You get so attached to them, and when they leave, the day they leave, it feels like you're missing a limb or something. I had a little bit of that experience. So that's some of the mechanisms that have come into place. But the primacy of the chicken itself has become really interesting, because that's now mediating the relationship between the community, the farmer, and the markets, right? I am generalizing a lot. So, quickly. So back to my initial statement, when she talks about these things being the police, it's not just about the work ethic, it's not about how much demand these chickens are making, it's because of the structure of the capital above them. So basically, there is a situation now where there is no capital. These things are being produced not through fast-moving capital, by relationship. So there are times where the farmer can't pay them for a month or two, and he'll say, look, you know, I'll give you some food for today, but let's make a plan, and so on. And sometimes they would then work for him, and so on. So they have this interesting kind of almost codependency, almost family type thing, but it's a really interesting, what I've called a, I have to look this up, like collaborative production in the absence of capital. So this is a new way of trying to fund that space that was supported by white capital, which no longer exists. I also then looked at the special nature of the crop, sorry, this is the Ross 308. That particular bed itself is very, very particular. It's very special. Very quickly, in 3 minutes, that broiler, in fact, has a huge history. It has this history in the 50s. Basically, in the 50s, there was a discovery. The chickens were produced for dual purpose. So a chicken would be produced from eggs and meat together. But in the 50s, there was a change, because they realized that the chickens that produce the most meat don't lay that much eggs. The ones that lay a lot of eggs don't lay that much meat. So they separated the two genetically, let's say, by crossbreeding and so forth. But that developed in the 60s. High-speed computers came up. There was quantitative genetics and all sorts of mechanisms, right? All men of witchcraft. And what they could do is they could design this bed for particular purposes, for market-driven reasons. For example, the Ross 308 has a very large chest, because the breast meat in the developed markets is very expensive. So you find that the dollar cost per kg of chest is worth more than the whole bed, in fact. So you find that these things are developed to actually enhance this chest and the thighs, okay? That's a genetically designed thing, but these are designed in very closed environments, sterile environments, mostly done through mechanization. So the feeding, the water, the spraying, everything is mechanized. And these are the same chickens that are then sold in Matopo. Now, you can see that this thing is not used to any other animal. So if there's a chicken mataya running around, it will get sick. If a dog walks by, it will get sick. If a cow walks by, it will get sick. So you've got to guard the thing 24 hours a day. So the nature of the chicken itself, in fact, is very policing. So before you talk about who is abusing who, in fact, the chicken really is the policing. Right, so very quickly, I'm sorry, I'm just flying through this. So these are some of the social consequences. I've got maybe a minute now. And this lady says she had to move out of her house to stay with the chickens. She's moved her charger in there, and that's her new home pretty much. And she's very proud about this, in fact. This fellow said, you know, raising a child is easier than raising chickens, because at least you have some time when the kid is in school or doing something else and so on. Incidentally, his wife disagreed, but that was another. This fellow was a builder, and he says, you know what, I built a house, but 9 months of the year, me and my wife are living in the chicken house, so what was the point of that? Because this is the nature of that chicken business itself, right? And this fellow, these are the guys who came to help me. This is another type of labor which I didn't talk about. And they were saying that we've actually taken his farm and extended it into our homesteads, right? But he says, but there's no money, can't you see the country is closed? What choice do we have? So that's a very powerful. This one, she was worried about her kids and Christmas, there will be no shoes for Christmas and so forth. And these are some of the people who are supporting the project. And one of them said, you know, the poor by definition really knows we have no choice. But that's actually not true, I found, because these people do actually have a choice. And what I wanted to come back to in closing, I know I'm 30 seconds over. In closing is that the color of territory has changed a lot of things. The position of negotiation has shifted quite a bit because all of those community people, they complain bitterly about Umlungu, the white men that they're working with, but they don't want anybody to touch him. Nobody touches this man. He might look like a white guy, but he's outside. You know, they have this very strong relationship with him. But because of the nature of the color of the territory, they feel they have the authority to keep him here if they want or not. So they feel they are doing it because they have the choice to do it. They don't feel abused, they don't feel taken advantage of. In fact, they feel like it's a good opportunity to help him because he will help them. And they've been through markets up and down like this. The last bit, I had a quick chat with the farmer in question, and he was saying, well, there's also other external market issues. For example, these chickens that came in from Brazil drove the chicken prices down, collapsed the chicken market. Before, like a year or two ago, they were selling 1 kg of chicken for $2.65. At the time I was there, it was going for $1.65. And he had to subsidize the farmers and give them at least up to $1.80 just to stay alive together, just to keep. And the way he talks about it, he keeps saying we this, we that, us that, and he talks about it like it's really part of the, it's not a we, us and them kind of scenario anymore, which was funny. And the one line that I would like to leave with you is this one: how do you move production without moving capital? Because there's the cash crisis now. Before he used to pay them in cash, which they absolutely loved, but now there's no cash. So they tried using this the cell phone thing, they tried opening accounts, they tried all sorts of things, but that has also brought a distance between the two, because every month, every 2 months, he would come and hand them cash and they would talk and so on. But that lack of cash has kind of created this distance. But my big question was, is this a new form of collaborative production which doesn't require, let's say, white capital? Thank you for it.
Because it is that graveyard time of the day, isn't it? When, well, I usually have a nap this time of day anyway, so where do we find this? Okay, I don't know if any of you picked up on maybe it was a joke, or maybe it was just me being a bit nerdy, but this morning Patience mentioned that communal areas have been there for time immemorial. I picked up on that because it is what I've been looking at. I've been looking at Gokwe North, significant communal area of the northwest of Zimbabwe. And the reason I found that funny was because they haven't been there for time immemorial. Just before independence, they were the tribal trust lands. Just before that, they were the native reserves. Just before that, they were categorized as uninhabited or uninhabitable. So that was fun. That was interesting. Another thing to say is that my research, I'm a geographer, but my research is 20 years old, so I'm out of date. Although I do remember just before I went to research, my daughter's now 21, she was a baby at the time, people were saying, you're going to Zimbabwe, what good are you going to do? You know, what good things are you going to do? Who knows? When you do research, when you get involved in places and what they're like and expose what's going on in particular parts, I think there's little things that go on that may not get recognised. And in this case, at long last, some of the stuff I've been researching into, or had been then, has now been published. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about, is the chapter that's been published in the book, which I couldn't bring today because it's still hot off the press. It's still not available, but there are some flyers out there if you want to buy a copy. So that is the book. It's got 18 chapters, and chapter 8 is the one that I'm focusing on. And also out there, if you want to flick through, is my PhD, which, as you can see, is thick enough to stand on its own. But what struck me, Diana was asking me at lunchtime, she's saying, why aren't any of the speakers talking about food, insofar as that's so important in regards to livelihoods and people's lives? And she's forgotten, because 20 years ago I did do a talk about food here, where I... Pardon? You hadn't forgotten. And what I did there was refer to 200 or so different types of foods that I'd kind of researched into in Gokwe. Indigenous foods, traditional foods, local foods, whatever term you like to use. And so it's all in there in the appendix of my thesis. So, but first of all, I'd like to thank Admos Jimo, because really, going back to 2002, we set up this project. We had some ambitions to gather various researchers to look at the Northwest of Zimbabwe as a region, as a unit, not thinking about districts or provinces, just the sense of this Northwest. What's it like, and what are the dynamics of this place? So these are some of the researchers, some of whom you'll know well. Eric Warby, a brilliant anthropologist who researched into Gorodema, which is near the place where I worked in Nambuzia. Pius Nyambaras, a historian, done some fantastic work in that area. Amanda Hammer on conflict. Jocelyn and Joanne McGregor more towards the far part of the Northwest. I won't go through this, but it's basically a slide to show a sense in which we're trying to consider the region as a dynamic in itself, not just methodologically, but also in the sense that there can be power in the region in terms of what it can do for itself, but also for people's livelihoods. So this exciting book brings together an interdisciplinary and international group of scholars and artists who open novel perspectives on what regions are and do, and how we should understand their function and power in the contemporary globalized world. So the main thing I did in the chapter was to seek out challenges set up in the 1980s during the kind of transformation that was going on in human geography, which was to combine the possibilities for social action within the kind of context of regional geography. And some of the thinkers included Doreen Massey and several others. But within the chapter, we were told not to apply theory to the chapter. So if you get a chance to read the chapter, it's mostly empirical detail regarding the Northwest of Zimbabwe. But my background concerns were agroecology, drawing from Henrietta Moore and her, she did a brilliant talk on the BBC a couple of years back. Political ecology, it was a question I was going to ask patients about political ecology and whether you've considered that as a political aspect to what you do. And then all these other terms and concepts which are part of what we do if we research into rural and livelihoods considerations. Livelihood, subsistence, what is subsistence, indigeneity, a brilliant paper by, I forgot her name, but food security, agrarian change, place and region. These are all topics that I considered in the background. So what is the Northwest? Well, what I was trying to do is unpack the dynamic entanglements in select parts, but not all of it. As Patience said, even within the context of a region, it's not possible to find out everything, because there's all sorts that isn't known, or the parts that you can't get access to. But there's certain themes that seem to come together when we talk about the Northwest. I mean, for instance, I mean, at the time it was the late 90s. I'd been inspired by Robert Chambers, who talks about putting last first. And I think in one of his chapters in his books, he talks about going as far away from the centre as possible. And to my mind, Nembadzia was fairly close to that. You know, getting off the bus at Nembadzia for the first time in 1997 was two things. One, it was away from Harare significantly. The other was that it was a very tense time in Zimbabwe's political history. The late 90s were very tense. It's so the region is marginal. The region is described by its poverty, which is paradoxical because it's one of the main cotton-producing parts of the country. Ethnic tensions, geographic, agroecological constraints. People have talked about natural regions 4 and 5. Well, this is just unanimously region 5, but one of the greatest cotton-growing areas in Zimbabwe's history. It's also characteristic by migration, tsetse fly, malaria, and so on. So yeah, within the Northwest, I worked in Gokwe North. Within Gokwe North, I did most of my research among 25 householders in Nembadzia ward. And this gives a wider picture of the area from Alexander and Terence Ranger's paper. But coming up almost to date, a couple of years ago, 2014, so it's more than 2 years ago, but in the standard, the Zimbabwe standard, there's a description about Gokwe North has benefited very little from rural development programs by government, as the district remains one of the least developed. Now, you know, I might have suggested something different when I did my research, but having said that, it was an area that was struggling. You know, no running water, no tarred roads, and you know, certainly no electricity and that sort of thing. But this, you know, fast forwarding to more recent years, shows that it's still a relatively deprived part of the country. And some of you may have seen this paper by newspaper article by Chris McGreal, where he describes the violence and terror in that particular part. So most people are in the communal areas. There are a few commercial farms. The region has accounted for a significant number of Zimbabwe's cotton. But what I'm saying to some extent is that the region has changed its identity. There are constant changes in the geographical features of it, from a hostile, relatively uninhabitable frontier fly country, tsetse fly, to one of imagined livelihoods prospects with riches from cotton growing, freedom to cultivate on virgin land within the communal lands. So it kind of transformed from a hostile place to somewhere where there were prospects to make good livelihoods. And, you know, depicting the future, food security, that sort of thing. So in the first section of my chapter, I examine the rapid transformation of a largely peasant economy up to the 1960s. In 1946, it was described by a colonial administrator, apart from being full of tsetse fly, the Zimbabwe are for the greater part unfit for human habitation. When the fly has been eliminated and adequate water supplies and irrigation instituted, a reasonable number of natives can be settled. And Alexander McGregor and rangers discuss similar problems of harsh conditions, malaria, lack of markets, including the issues of colonial state, organised depopulation in Booby district. And Alexander and Ranger just point out the whole region was regarded as literally reserved territory, empty land in which African populations could be moved when it became necessary. And so as an example, 3 of the reserves were just drawn as circles on a map in the region. Reed, 1971, an administrator, Hokwe district, vast and remote area of northwestern Rhodesia, over 1.25 million hectares in extent, poor communications, and so on. And of course the problem of tsetse fly. But my second section discusses the arrival of cotton. Now, cotton had two effects. One is that increasing waves of immigrants, and but also it transformed the agrarian conditions. So the clearing of land, the removal of tsetse fly, and the enablement for agriculture to take place. And here we've got the Kotco depot in Mbongeni. But just going back to the early 60s, Warby described the rapid actions to clear land in other parts of Zimbabwe. The Rhodesdale residents were loaded onto lorries at short notice and given transport into the hot malarial lowlands of Sanyati and Sibungwe. And Chimechinachka's novel Dew in the Morning also describes that process. My third section describes the institutional developments that happened post-1980s. So cotton arrived along waves of immigrants. This happened simultaneously with the war for independence. So there's that struggle, geographic struggle that's going on with people in the area, with the war taking place. But what I found interesting links to patients as well as that some of the customary institutions governing indigenous land use remained, including rest days on Thursdays, Chisi, the headman's authority, sacred woodlands, prohibited areas, including grazing land near dams, sacred woodlands, and some of that related to the early colonial legal structures that had been put into place. So the Northwest is kind of is a food insecurity paradox, which has been recorded as a notion whereby economic growth and expansion took place, and yet it's an area where many households and malnutrition were in existence. So it transformed some aspects of the local economy, but also, in some cases, exacerbated food insecurity. And so my next section in the chapter discusses the opening up of communal lands and new ideas emerging in the 1990s, including the use of wildlife resources, and how this possesses sometimes contradictory challenges. So is it agriculture, is it the wildlife consideration that is being pursued? And getting close to the end, the chapter ends by highlighting some of the conflict and place-based dynamics that have given the region its uneven and volatile characteristics. So first of all, there's the dynamic influx of new settlers, meant the unsettling of old ways. The newcomers brought with them modern sets of aspirations. The conditions that were seen as primitive, which feature in Sibungwe before the 1960s, such as lack of infrastructure, schools, clinics, electricity, tap water, supermarkets, needed needed developing. The 1960s, the simultaneous attempt to withstand sanctions in UDI in 1965 and also grow cotton to quell any nationalist uprising. And that's a political point that that some people, some colonial agricultural people considered that cotton was good to quell any uprising. More recently, 2010's neoliberal market forces have once again exposed the region to overall lack of infrastructure and also significant signs of a shift away from cotton. We saw from Patient's presentation that cotton is re-emerging in other parts of the country, but also potential economic values for wilderness and community-based natural resource management. And just to conclude, African political geography has raised new questions on the extent of non-Western or non-capitalist making of places. And also the two-way relationship between people's livelihoods, making places what they are, and the qualities and structure that make up places influencing the way those livelihoods operate. So achieving livelihood and household food security has not been helped by recent political crisis in Zimbabwe, as well as the increasing neoliberal development policies. So many questions have been raised about the so-called advantages of mixed farming and the ideas of diversified livelihood approaches. Thank you very much.